If I tell you medical device cybersecurity, you're probably going to talk to me about the security of the medical device. But what about the organization that takes care of this medical device? Does it need to be secured? Karandeep is a very influential person that you might recognize from the MedTech podcast and her different contents he posts on TikTok, LinkedIn, and many more platforms to tell medical device manufacturers how to build better products, comply to regulations, etc., etc. Today, he's giving us his best tips in terms of cybersecurity. Enjoy. Hi, folks. Welcome to a thrilling new episode of the Medical Device Cybersecurity Podcast. We have here Karandeep Badvan, and today we're going to talk a bit about general cybersecurity concepts. Badvan, Karandeep, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Medical Device Cybersecurity Podcast.
Thank you, Malcolm. Mathieu, how are you today?
Good. That's great to have someone with so much experience as you in the medical device space in general. Karandeep, we've had a few opportunities to talk, you and I, and you've given me some great tips about general views on cybersecurity that you had. Would you like to share some of these tips that you've noticed for your auditors about cybersecurity in general?
Yeah, so effectively, I think cybersecurity goes beyond the scope of just general quality and regulatory requirements, acts, and standards. Cybersecurity is also a piece when it comes to things like backups, general user information, and there's a lot of aspects to it as well. And I think the beauty of what's happening now, especially in the quality and regulatory one, especially the FDA, I feel as though they're leading the way when it comes to this. There's several different guidance documents where now regulators are actually starting to looking to see what cybersecurity elements you had. And the example I can give is under the old Medical Device Directive, which was written in 1990. The idea of software itself being a medical device was completely alien. That's why a lot of these software came under class 1. And what I'm seeing now, which I think is a step in the right way, is under MDR audits, when they're doing particularly the risk assessments or when they're looking at your risk analysis, they're looking to see if you have cybersecurity elements in there. Because if you have a connected device or a software of some sort, cybersecurity presents risk, and it presents risks that otherwise didn't necessarily exist in a medical device. There's all these different new ones, and notified parties are really looking into that. So I do think the medical device industry is moving in the right way and having the right attitude. And I think with the platform that you have yourself here, it's bringing awareness to the importance of cybersecurity. And number one is, of course, preventive measures. And then, of course, sadly, what happens in terms of what you can do in terms of reactive measures.
Absolutely, both working hand in hand. And yeah, I agree with you that cybersecurity is becoming more and more aware from both the regulator and the medical device space as well. One thing I'd like to tackle with you, Karandeep, is the fact that myself included, in medical devices, tends to talk a lot about the cybersecurity of the medical device itself, but we often miss the point when it comes to the cybersecurity of the organization that's delivering this medical device, and that's equally important. So, currently, from your experience, what are some things that medical device manufacturers should watch out for when it comes to cybersecurity within their organization? What do they have to lose?
I think that's a great point that you raised there. Defining cybersecurity risks beyond the device. The device is one element of it. But you've got things like computer systems, you've got things like servers. These all basically come under that cybersecurity banner. And outside of the standards and regulations, you also have to look at cybersecurity in general as well, so not just the device. And I think it's a key point that you touched on here. I think one of the biggest gaps that I see manufacturers doing is, as you point out rightly, is just focusing purely on the device. Even if it's connected or if it's AI based, you need to be looking at this and ignoring the broader digital landscape in which they operate in. An example I can give you right now is EQMS, electronic quality management system. Some people have very simple systems where they have Google Drive or SharePoint, and they may be using one of the very many EQMS systems out there as well. But if you're storing technical files and somebody breaches that system, they can alter your critical documentations. They can go in and change your standard operating procedures. And they can even do it potentially unnoticed. Because if you have someone who's quite good at hacking or getting into your systems, they may go in and make unnoticed changes or even steal your algorithm. And generally speaking, if you are a software as a medical device or using AI or machine learning, your algorithm effectively is like the blueprint of your product. And somebody can go in and steal that from you and then go out and make that same device in a better way. And you may have absolutely no idea. Another one, of course, is medical devices often involve patients. So you may basically have patient data. Leaking of patient data is a huge risk, and you could potentially breaching regulations worldwide. You need to comply with things like GDPR. You also need to comply with things like HIPAA when you come to the US. You also have NIS2. We now also have the EU AI Act as well. Pretty much any medical device that's using AI is going to fall under the high risk banner. And especially with AI, there's things like data quality, data traceability and protection. They're all essential. So my advice will be look at the platforms that you're using. Are you using a Google Drive? What software do you have installed on your employees' computers and systems? But there's also other breaches of our cybersecurity, and especially with the software companies, what's quite common with software companies, they work remotely. Now, people who work remotely, and I think it's a great way to do it, love to work in coffee shops or McDonald's or supermarkets, etc., anywhere they go, or sometimes in the gyms. But then, of course, anyone that works in cybersecurity would say the same thing. They're using things like public Wi-Fi. So maybe you need to have something like a VPN installed on your computer or something like that as a form of protection. So that's what you need to see. What are the working
Hmm.
practices of your companies? So these are all factors that you need to have. And there's nothing wrong with asking your employees, hey, do you work at home? Do you work in cafes? Do you work in certain places? And you can put measures in there as well. Another one, of course, is backups. When I speak to companies and go, are you backing things up? They're like, yes, our system automatically backs everything up. I say, okay, great. Go back and see if you can get data from 7 days ago, 14 days ago, 21 days ago. And you will not believe how many companies don't have no idea to do it. They're like, oh, we've never had to do it before, so we don't really know how to. And then, of course, again, there's the testing piece, but great,
Yeah.
it's automatically backed up. And the example I can give is like and then as we mentioned, we talked about this on LinkedIn as well in one of my posts. My old IT teacher, and I remember in school days, he used to have portable hard drives and used to download the school systems and take them home with him in a box. This guy was probably ahead of his time. Like, I really mean it. When I was a child, I thought, why is this guy doing this? But he made a great point. He goes, well, if the school catches fire or somebody breaks into their servers or, there's some sort of internet breach, he goes, I have all the files here on disks that I can just bring back. And I thought that was amazing. And it made me learn that as I got older, is kind of have a backup system outside of that system. So if you're using something like Google or SharePoint, have something that's there. Maybe that's a manual download onto your service. Maybe that's using another platform. One platform can go down, but two major platforms going down at exactly the same time is extremely unlikely. So, effectively the way around it is have a backup for your backup. And another thing I recommend what companies do as well, it's they have a major audit due maybe in the next day or two, just do a manual download the day before. Maybe you can't get into your EQMS or your electronic drives, etc. And you can be very open with the auditor, say, hey, look, sorry, we can't get into the system because of
Hmm.
X, Y, Z, but this is all the information we have and the audit flows. You can't say to an auditor, hey, sorry, we can't get into our systems. There'll be an instant fail. And another one that needs to be reviewed as well, it's who has access to your systems. That's what you need to do. Effectively, you want the quality manager to be able to go in and look at your draft documents and your draft records. That's fine. But you don't want somebody who's working on the shop floor to get access to draft documents and then assume that basically that they are the current ones. So you need to have controls in place. Of course, you want everyone in the company to have access to approved documents. Everyone can read them. But things like draft or something that's in work, those have to be controlled. And then number two, of course, validate. Go and check it. This is what I've done with companies as well. Sometimes they'll say something like, oh, only the managers can get into this. I'm like, okay, so what's the link to the folder? I go into the folder. I'm like, okay, so how is it that I have access to it? These things have to be tested. And ridiculous as it sounds, is kind of people are so reliant on technology, which is fine, but go out and test it. Just
Yeah.
because the program says that these are the controls that we have in place, go out and test them. This is software. Software can make mistakes. Humans can make mistakes. So go out there and actually test it. So that's what we need to. These are all the cybersecurity risks that have to be considered. Agree, they're beyond the device, but they're going to feed into it. And these are the things that a lot of companies miss.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you summed it all up here. I think, that there's some odd things. I'm not sure if you've never noticed this is, for instance, when we protect our house, we'll have different sets of keys, right? And usually it won't just be one person having keys. You'll have a backup at a neighbor or friends. And yet when we consider data that's on Google Drive, we just put it on Google Drive and just assume it's going to be in one place, it's going to be safe. But we don't even do this with our own security. So I think it's quite interesting, this parallel of digital gets treated differently than when we work with physical things are maybe a bit more easy to grasp. So I wanted to ask about my experience as a in cybersecurity. A lot of the time, folks will use this argument, let's say, that the data doesn't belong to me. It's on Google Drive, and therefore it's not up to me to secure it. What's your perspective on this, Karandeep?
It goes back to the thing of the analogy that I can give in the device world is there was, especially into the old MDD, where companies will go out and buy medical devices and slap their label over it. It's known as OBL, whole brand labeling. And that used to work, which doesn't really work under the MDR now. But if you've got your name on it and you're the one that's handling the data, you're the one who's going to get the complaints. That's the way that you need to see it. You are handling, you can't just blame Google Drive because If a customer's data gets breached and then that customer knows that they signed up and they gave you the data, they're not going to complain to Google. They're going to complain to you because you are the person that took that data from them and is storing it. So yes, there is some elements of, Google Drive should have securities there. But then again, the sole responsibility in things, and especially from a legal point of view, falls onto you, the data collector. And that's what these people are failing to realize. And again, we go back to what I was saying earlier, is people are so reliant on technology that they just assume that Google has technology in place, and they do. But like with anything else, data breaches can happen. It can happen to the biggest companies. It can happen to anybody. It's still your responsibility to do as much as you can. Now, you can never be 100% security proof. It's all to do with layers of security. And that's what it comes down to, is you do as much as you can to make sure that you're safe. The risk is always going to be there. But like in the medical device world, we accept the fact that risks will be there, but we just mitigate as far as possible. That's what we try to do. Mitigate as far as possible and do as much as you can to keep those in place. But the responsibility falls on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the responsibility falls on you as a key point. So what I saw as well, the distinguishment that you made between you didn't lose the data, but you're still responsible for it ultimately because you hired a third party that was supposed to take care of that data on the behalf of the patient. And this is stressed by GDPR and HIPAA and different regulations that govern data, is that the the way that data is collected is very much structured. And you as a medical device manufacturer have to follow these protocols. Even though it wasn't you personally that lost it, it was still you that the people trusted their data. And medical data is can be quite sensitive. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. We've seen GDPR, HIPAA. There's also many different legislations. NIST 2. We've also seen the AI Act that also have cybersecurity components. Would you like to comment on how you've seen this being taken by medical device manufacturers? What are some good practices that you've seen?
So I'm going to sound very controversial when I say this, but when I read all of these different regulations, acts, etc., it's stuff that the manufacturer should be doing anyway. So by all means, they state that you must be doing these things, but we shouldn't need to have an act or regulation. Companies should have the common sense to go out and thinking, okay, we have things like post-market surveillance. We're going to do things like data breaching. We're going to do things like penetration testing. So these are things that companies should be doing anyway. So my view is any company complaining about complying to these sort of standards and regulations is one of which is not taking the cybersecurity seriously. Now, any company that is taking cybersecurity clearly would not have an issue with any of these acts or regulations or rules that they have to follow. Because it's stuff that they're doing anyway. The only difference is with acts and standards, it's just going to tell you best practices and how maybe to present that or go about it. So maybe that's the way that you can do it. But then that's generally my view. These are things that companies should be doing anyway. And the example I can give is like the EU AI Act. Under that, as I mentioned, medical device software effectively or AI machine learning would fall under high risk. And there's an element there where it talks about things like, looking at the post-market surveillance for the AI. That should be part of your post-market surveillance strategy anyway. If you have an AI-enabled software as a medical device, you shouldn't just be looking at the modes of failure. You should be looking at the AI. How is the AI acting? Is the AI giving false positives? Is it giving false negatives? The stuff that you should be doing anyway. That's my view. It's kind of, yes, these regulations are there that we have to follow them. But then it goes back to the argument, which I was saying was when companies transition from MDD to MDR, a lot of it was stuff that the good manufacturers were doing anyway. And if you was one of those good manufacturers, it wasn't too much of a change and it wasn't too much of a pain to transition.
I think a lot of the cybersecurity you made earlier, the distinction between pre- preventive measures and responsive measures. And I think a lot of the time we tend to focus on responsive because it gives us a sense of control. And yet, a lot of what we want to do, what we should do in medical device cybersecurity, especially given the nature of medical devices being spread all around and you can't really control them, is focus on these preventive measures. And then when the time comes to respond, you're prepared, you have different things. But I think really putting the emphasis on this preparation side is how you can future proof medical devices, especially given when and that oftentimes if they're out in the market, it's much harder to respond to different things. So I think a lot of the time in cybersecurity, you should focus on preventive systems. Is that something you agree with, or is that how's your perspective from more of an overall perspective of risk?
So I always stand up that, prevention is better than cure. It's often much cheaper to implement systems and much more time saving, a lot less resources needed to put preventive measures in place than it is to actually go out and fix it. If we go online, I mean, I'm not going to mention any particular companies and you see the cost, what it takes to recover from security breaches. If they spent maybe just a small fraction of that putting measures in place, things can be avoided. And the analogy that I can probably give here, let's just say there's a famous football or soccer player. Somebody would say to the soccer player, hey, wear these shoes and it's going to reduce your chance of ankle injury. That football player won't listen. They go out in the field and then they get an injury and they think, you know what? I'm going to get a pair of these shoes when I recover. And it's the similar analogy here is kind of when things go wrong, I think it's possibly human nature. That is the point at which there's something, I need to take this seriously. And the issue, what I find is when it comes to, especially the analogy that I give is like regulatory or cybersecurity, there's no immediate return on investment. It's not like you put cybersecurity into a company and you put these measures in that you're going to make 100 times more sales. It doesn't really work like that. But then, of course, when there's a breach, you're probably going to lose tons of sales. So again, there's no immediate return on investment. And it's hard to measure that, okay, if I put X amount of dollars into cybersecurity, I'm going to get X amount of sales. But again, it's more a preventive measure. It's kind of if it happens, there's companies out there that have no cybersecurity, maybe done so regulatory and out on the market chancing it. But reality of the situation is what I find is if you're in this game for the long term, eventually it will catch up on you.
Yeah, yeah. And usually medical devices are out in the market for many, many years. So the long term is synonym of medical devices in many ways. So I want to go back to the controls. If we're talking about prevention controls, what are some controls that we can talk about? We've mentioned using a VPN. We mentioned, I'm not sure, we antivirus. What are some good prevention measures that you think would go well within the medical devices?
So prevention measures, of course, is don't just have one cloud platform for everything. So of course, have your primary cloud platform, which you use, but have a different system in place. If you see any breaches or anything like that, there's another one that's there as well. Another one, of course, is don't let the people who have built your code
Hmm.
do your penetration and cybersecurity testing. So the guy that goes out and makes the code is probably really, really good at code, probably not the best at cybersecurity. And likewise, somebody who's a cybersecurity expert may not be the best in coding. So my view is get the best experts for those small pieces rather than get somebody that's like a jack of all trades effective. So that's one thing that you need to do. Other controls, again, is access control. The less people that have access to the kind of stuff that you have, the less potential there is for a breach. So that doesn't mean, hey, don't only give control to like one guy. That's not good. But then don't give control to 100 people either. So only give systems to people that need it. Don't just say, hey, look, everyone in quality can have access to drafts. No, because if there's only two people in quality that do drafts, those are the two people that you need to do as well. Another one, of course, is one with companies, and particularly when they're using things like contractors and consultants, revoke access immediately the moment they leave the company and the project closes. Because I've seen it with
Hmm.
companies before, and I've had it before where I onboard for a company and I go through my own email address rather than their systems. And I can still have access to the systems maybe a week or 2 weeks later. And then I'm just thinking in my head, well, if the wrong person gets access to these sort of things, what can they do? So the way that you can mitigate that is kind of rather than have them having access via their email addresses, maybe provide them with a laptop and maybe go through a online server or something like that. So add like a barrier into it as well. So that is the one, access controls. The second one, of course, is regular backup testing. Make sure that you're getting your backups tested. Can I go back a day or 7 days or 14 days? But don't just look at it on a screen. This is another one that
Hmm.
companies are doing. They say, oh, we went into the backup system and all the files are there. Okay, but can you open the files? Maybe the files are corrupted. We don't know until you actually open them and test them. So that's another one as well. People are just looking at the screen and say, hey, look, I get the file from 1 week, 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago. Okay, great. But try and open it. Is it working or is it corrupted? Another one, of course, as a preventive measure is secure onboarding and cyber awareness training. And I know we talked about this offline. When you're onboarding into a company, they'll give you, this is the finance department. This is how you go about booking your holidays. This is quality and regulatory. Why not have cyber awareness? Because, if your password is changing every 30 days, somebody's thinking, or especially if it's somebody the older generation, not be used to technology. It's basically, they're going to think, the password's changing every 30 days. This is really annoying. I'm going to keep it super simple. But then if you make it clear to them, hey, if you don't change your password, a breach may happen or somebody gets access to your fast and so that's why I'm changing my password on a regular basis. Now I understand it. So as human psychology goes, if you understand why you have to do something, then you're more likely to comply to it. That is something that is there as well. And again, stress the importance of password management. What do some people do? They'll maybe put their name and a few numbers and maybe a few symbols, and then when they're required to change a password, they maybe move one symbol or change a digit. That's how you leave yourself open to potentially being hacked. That's another one as well. Another one, of course, again, this one be slightly controversial, but device and network monitoring. What are your employees doing in the company? What are the websites that they're going on? If they're going on websites, maybe that might leave them open, websites that may be stealing their data. That is also a breach as well. So you may want to monitor what they're doing. And of course, if they're doing it on their personal devices, that's fine. But if they're on a work device and they have access to sensitive information, but they're going on websites so they potentially can be compromised, and they may not even be aware. So, for example, somebody may go on a gaming website and play games on a regular, but then not realize that this website is not secure. And then obviously, if you make them aware saying, hey, look, this website that you're going on is potentially going to cause issues and leave us open to a hack. VPNs for remote access as well. That's another one as well. And another one that I recommend, systems as well. What do people do? As I mentioned, people that work remotely or go to a coffee shop or maybe in a public place. Sometimes they leave their laptops unattended and it doesn't auto lock, which means that in the time that you're disappearing to maybe grab a coffee or go to the bathroom, somebody can potentially get into that laptop and steal the information. And anyone who watches Hollywood movies would have seen such actions like that in place where somebody gets up from their desk and then somebody goes in, is able to download data quickly and leave. So maybe have something like you emphasize, every time you close your screen, that it must get locked. Another one that I call a low hanging fruit, and always
Yeah.
aim for low hanging fruit, is multi-factor authentication. It's so easy to do. Great, someone stole your password. But if you got something like multi-factor authentication where somebody has to go to an app on their phone or maybe they get a text message to their number, despite this person getting your password, they're still not going to get in. And this is what I call low hanging fruit. What is that person who's trying to hack in your system going to do? Say, too complicated, and move on to the next one. So that's a very easy one that you can do as well. Audit trails is another one, having change controls in place, audit trails, what changes have been made, who's made them. So you can detect anything that's strange. So for example, if you start seeing, so let's say your company is only open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but then you get up the next morning and you go on your system and you see somebody who'd had access at 10 p.m. and was making changes, then you're going to think something is not right here. So that's something that we need to look into as well. And this is another one that companies don't have. So if you're working to security standards and things, SOC 2 or ISO 2701, things like that, you may have this. But an incident response plan, companies have like disaster recovery procedures, but an incident response plan, because when an incident happens, everyone's going to panic, but nobody knows what to do, right? But if there's a procedure in place, if somebody says, I think we've been hacked as a company, and there's a procedure, they go, okay, I reported to this person and this is what I do, rather than just sit there and think, what do I do now? So these are a lot of small things that don't cost a lot of time and money to put into a company. And even if you just do these, you'll be surprised how secure your company is.
Yeah. No, it's excellent. You've said a lot of things. The low hanging fruit, I think, is a great emphasis because a lot of time people will think, oh, cybersecurity, you have to make a lot of investments. It's burdensome. It hurts users, but I don't think a lot of medical device manufacturers are aware how many cybersecurity tools are included in their current software licensing environment. For instance, Google Workspace, you'll have access to a whole piece of identity everywhere. We can see who has access to what in what convenient place. I don't think a lot of medical device manufacturers go there to regularly check who has access to things. And I think it's a pity because it's got a lot of information. And also, as you said, multi-factor into authentication, it can be done for very cheap, if not for free. And a lot of the softwares that you have, it's all about balancing, right? We have to make sure that it doesn't hurt the user too much. But for sure, having a bit of a balance between uh, a good security foundations and also respecting the user's time and not having to make them click through multiple things is very beneficial. So yeah, I mean awareness, and I think awareness is a key thing. You mentioned that we have to make sure that people lock their devices as they go away and are mindful of what they do on the internet. I think a lot of things can be solved through especially for larger companies through procedures. So regulate, like when people come into the company, they have to read certain things, they have to accept certain terms and conditions and be reminded regularly. And another thing that perhaps we've talked a lot about in the past years in cybersecurity, phishing. Have you seen it being an issue, Karandeep, and what are the solutions that you found to such challenges?
So I don't think phishing is exclusive to any particular industry. It can happen to anyone. So, why does phishing matter in medical devices? It's something that doesn't come to mind. It's the big thing here is like we were talking about, it can potentially impact the device indirectly. So it may not be a direct impact on the device, but maybe it's indirectly. So that could be some things like, leading to unauthorized access, exposure of credentials and the causes of tampering as well. Or it could be other ones as well. So it kind of, if there's somebody like a marketer, so there can be low level phishing and they realize that the format of the emails in your company are a certain way, and then they get the names of the people that work in your company, they now possibly have the emails of all the people in the company. Actually go out and contact them. So that's a very small thing as well. And again, phishing matters is basically, people can be tricked into clicking the links that maybe compromise them. So for example, if somebody hacks into one of the emails and it looks like it's from one of the notified bodies, and they say, hey, this is the portal for your technical file submission. So let's just say this scenario happens. As anyone who's worked with a notified body, you have access to a portal.
Mhm.
Now, if somebody uses a spoofing software and makes it look like they've sent an email from that notified body and said, hey, such and such documentation is missing. Can you send this to us? They've now got access to your technical documentation. They've got your blueprints. You can be none the wiser. And there's small things like that as well. Another one, and then this is one that I potentially thought about. I don't think it probably happened before. It's in the EU under the MDR, and even under the MDD, we had the concept of what's known as a unannounced audit. So once every 5 years, the notified body will knock on your premises and do an unannounced audit on you. What's stopping somebody pretending to be an auditor? If somebody says, hey, I'm an auditor from your notified body, and somebody from a non-regulatory background opens the door, they can, oh no, the notified body's here. Quickly, we need to go. The auditors are here. Yes, please sit down. Let me sort you out. So that's why I often say, and this is a small tip that I say, for anybody in your company, have an unannounced audit procedure. I really recommend that. Because if it's a genuine unannounced audit, they will knock on your door and not tell you, hence the word unannounced. But often they will have an authorization letter. Often you can tell them, hey, look, sit down. I'm going to call the notified body and check if this is genuine. It may sound silly. It may sound ridiculous that somebody may pretend to be a notified body, but the potential is out there. So I always say, like we were talking about, have procedures in place because let's just say all of the quality and regulatory people are not there. They know to do the checks. Somebody from marketing or somebody from human resources opens the door. All they're going to hear is the auditors are. They may not necessarily know what to do and it's not their fault. But by having a procedure, that's something that they can do. So again, that's why phishing is a problem or spoofing or people pretending to be who they're not. And it goes down to the concept of maybe there's another way around it when it goes to the concept of ethical hacking. Somebody may want to run a test on your systems, pretend to be an auditor or pretend to see what happens in a company. And that can open you. So maybe that's another way. If you think that you're secure, maybe you want to test some of your systems, you may want to hire an ethical hacker and see where the gaps are in your system. And then you can address them before it becomes a real hacker. Because at that point, it gets very expensive and potentially very costly in terms of time, reputation, market representation, etc.
And it's a requirement in the validation and verification phase to test the critical part of your medical device. So that's a good point. I didn't know about this. The fake potential audits within the company. I think having set rules is quite a good one. Um, Very interesting there. Karandeep, if for final thoughts here, I want to thank you for coming out on the episode. If you had if people want to find out more about you, where can they reach out?
Sure. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So again, just as you have on your program here, where you talk about cybersecurity, I also try to simplify quality and regulatory because it can be quite confusing. So LinkedIn is the best way to reach me as well, or you can contact me via email. Or if you're interested, I also run a podcast called the MedTech Podcast, where I interview different thought leaders in the industry. So multiple ways to reach out to me, or they can email me and I'll give you a copy of my email as well that you can share in the description.
Yeah, in the description. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Karandeep, for joining on the podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, what are the top learnings from this episode? Number one, look beyond the medical device itself. It's not just about the medical device. The organization that builds this medical device and its suppliers needs to be protected to protect patients and also your trade secrets, and in case the auditors comes and tries to audit your company, and if you don't have that information, it's going to be a fail. Number two, implement access controls and authentication. Something very, very important that any organization can do today is look at who has access to what and start restricting these accesses into what's strictly necessary. You don't need to give everything to everyone, just focus on what's essential for each core of the job. Number 3, check the existing tooling. Many medical device organizations already have access to plenty of cybersecurity resources that they can leverage, but they don't use it yet because they're not aware. So check if your company has access to MFA, can implement different factors of control of data, or can have even antivirus included in some of their software. So make sure you check this and that you protect your organization for tomorrow to build better medical devices today. I'm the Cyber Doctor, and I'll see you on the next one. Please subscribe.